Greetings and welcome to another lecture in Introductory Psychology. This one deals with social psychology, specifically with prejudice. Now, prejudice is an attitude, okay? It's just a specific type of attitude, usually negative. I mean, we could talk about people being positively prejudiced toward someone, but usually that goes along with being negatively prejudiced toward everyone else. So it's a usually negative attitude held toward members of a specific social group. Now, the social group can be something visible. We tend to think of prejudice in terms of things like race and ethnic background, or disability, or sexual orientation. But it can also be something as mundane as what sporting team someone likes. Okay, or Star Trek versus Star Wars, or, I mean, you name it, unfortunately, people can be prejudiced. Now, like other attitudes, prejudice has three components to it that luckily are named exactly what they are. The first is called the cognitive component. Cognition means thinking. So the cognitive component is what we think about those members of that group, what we feel about them, what we believe about them, what we know to be true, or what we think we know to be true. And so when you're talking prejudice, very often the cognitive component consists in large part of stereotypes. This is probably a word you've heard, stereotype. A stereotype is a tendency to think that members of a group share characteristics because they're in that group. Okay? That members of the group share these characteristics, are more likely to have these characteristics because they are members of this group. Well, everybody in that group is like this, and everyone in that group thinks this, and everybody in that group feels like that, and everybody in that group behaves like that. Now, we know that this is not 100% true. We know that there are always exceptions to these stereotypes, but we tend to think that people in these groups are more likely to hold to the stereotypes than people in other groups, which, by the way, is not necessarily true. We must admit, however, that a lot of stereotypes have a kernel of truth to them, way down at the core, or at least something that might have been true in the past, even if it isn't true now. Or it might be true of a few people in the group, but not a huge number. The thing is, though, what stereotypes do is they take that and they blow it up out of all proportion, and they make us think everybody in that group is like that, which of course is not true. Now, what keeps us believing these stereotypes are something called an illusory correlation. Remember, a correlation is a connection between two or more things, showing that they're related in some kind, they're connected somehow. An illusion, of course, means that it's not real. In illusory correlation, we tend to remember the people in those groups that fit the stereotype more than we remember the people in the groups who do not. We remember the people who fit the stereotypes more than we remember the people who don't. So when you think back about all the people you've met in one of those groups, you have a tendency to remember the people who fit the stereotype. We see what we expect to see. We remember what we believe is true. It's very difficult to get people to change their minds. We have a tendency to stick with what we think is true, what we believe is true, over what is actually true. And those illusory correlations are what keeps stereotype alive. If you think back at members of a group, you may think, well, it seems like everybody I've met in that group has acted like that. The odds are really good that they haven't. Another component is the affective component. Affect is a fancy word for emotion. This is what you feel about members of the group, which generally in prejudice, remember, is negative. I don't like them, I hate them, they disgust me, I fear them, that sort of thing. Lastly, there's the behavioral component, which, not surprisingly, is how we behave around these individuals, the members of these groups. For the behavioral component, a large aspect here is discrimination. Now, I sometimes hear people who more or less seem to think that discrimination and prejudice are synonyms. They are not. Prejudice is an attitude, has a cognitive and affective and behavioral component. Discrimination is behavior. It is the behavioral component. It's a verb. Okay? Prejudice is a noun. So discrimination is treating people differently due to prejudice. Now that's what it means here. Psychologists actually use discriminate to mean any sort of telling things apart. But when we're talking about prejudice, it means that you're treating people differently due to prejudice. If you're prejudiced, do you have to discriminate? No. And there are lots of people who may be prejudiced who don't act on those prejudices, who don't discriminate, either because it's illegal or because they don't want other people to look down on them or for whatever other reasons. So just because you're prejudiced doesn't mean that you discriminate, although by definition, if you discriminate, then you're prejudiced, at least according to the definition we're using here. Now, as I mentioned, prejudice is an attitude, and like any other attitude, it's learned. No one is born prejudiced. Unfortunately, we are born with tendencies to think in certain ways that may kind of predispose us toward prejudice, that make it more likely that we become prejudiced because of these ways that we think. And one of the real biggies here is our tendency to divide the world up into two groups: in-group and out-group. Now, you may not have heard these particular terms before, but you've almost certainly heard what are synonyms for in-group and out-group, and that is us and them. Us and them. Us is the in-group, them is the out-group. Now, all of us as human beings live in the center of an infinite number of different circles of us and them, because a lot of it depends on how you look at it. For instance, us could be everyone in a particular classroom, and them everyone who isn't. Us could be everyone taking a particular class, them everyone who isn't. Us could be everybody in a particular major, them everyone who isn't. Us could be everybody at a particular school. Us could be everybody at a particular city. Us could be everybody in a particular county or metropolitan area or state or region of the country or hemisphere or continent, or, you get the idea. And that's basically just geography. Imagine all the different circles you live in terms of what you like and don't like, what you like to do, the music you listen to, the sports you watch, the TV shows, religion, us and them. Huge number of circles of us and them. We tend to like us and not like them. We certainly don't like them as much as we like us. Because, of course, if you do like them more than you like us, it will probably be suggested to you that you go join them, and that way them will be us and us will be them, and you will like us more than you like them, and try not to listen to that too many times. It does make sense, but it'll make your head hurt. Okay? We like us more than we like them. In fact, very often, we look down on them. Them are different from us. We like us. We don't like them. They're different. And oftentimes, we also have something called the outgroup homogeneity effect. Now, the outgroup homogeneity effect is best summed up by a potentially very offensive sentence that, while I am going to say it, I am taking the time to preface my statement with the fact that, no, I don't actually believe this, and I'm not aiming it at any group in particular, but you may have heard this sentence, which goes like this: "They all look alike to me." And that's true. We tend to look at people in the outgroup as being all identical. They're all this faceless mob that look alike and think alike and feel the same things and do the same things and believe the same things. They're all like that, which of course is not true, but we tend to look at it that way. All people who like this sporting team are morons. All people who like this sport are thugs. I mean, all people who like this music are just stupid. I mean, outgroup homogeneity effect. Now, when it comes to appearance is when you often hear this. And to go to a somewhat safer version of this, when I was in graduate school, I worked with dolphins. And I had to learn to tell apart 4 Atlantic bottlenose dolphins essentially at a glance. And boy, you want individuals that look alike. You try dolphins. Dolphins do not have the same sort of features that we as humans look for to tell individuals apart, but they are different. The differences may be subtle, and if you're not used to looking for them, you probably won't find them at first. But you stare at dolphins long enough and you can tell them apart. And I learned to do that. I've gotten to the point where I can tell dolphins apart at a glance. And it's not just the dolphins I worked with. I watched that movie a few years back called Dolphin Tale, about a dolphin called Winter who lost part of her tail. And I could very easily tell the difference between actual winter. I'm not sure they used any other live dolphins other than winter, simply because it's difficult to fake missing the flukes of the tail. But I could tell the difference very easily between Winter the dolphin and the fake winter stunt dolphin, the animatronic one, the model that they used. That looked so fake to me. It was just completely wrong. The rostrum, the nose was wrong. The color was wrong. The eyes were just scary. And not to mention the computerized dolphins at the beginning. Those dolphins don't swim like that. They don't look like that. That was completely wrong. And it stuck out to me to the point that I couldn't suspend my disbelief. I'm looking at that going, oh, that's just wrong. And of course, the people around me were like, shut up! We're watching this! Because they couldn't tell the difference. One of the ways to get rid of this in-group versus out-group is simple. Bring the members of the out-group into your in-group. Get to know them. Once you get to know them, they won't be them anymore. They'll be us. Because once you bring members of an out-group into your in-group, you realize that we're actually very much alike. Now, individual personality needs can predispose someone toward prejudice. Someone, for instance, who's very rigid or very conventional, you have to behave like this or you're just wrong, is going to be more likely to be prejudiced. People who are sadists are going to be more likely to be prejudiced. Sadism is deriving pleasure, usually sexual pleasure, from hurting someone else. And the thing is, believe it or not, human beings usually have to be provoked pretty badly to hurt another human being. We don't really like to hurt other human beings. We don't really like to kill other human beings. The way to get around this is simple. Make that individual that you want to hurt or kill not a human being. Make them one of them. That faceless mob that aren't human. They're less than human. They're not like us. They don't think like us. They don't feel like us. They're not us. They're not human. They're them. Because once you've turned those individuals into them, into that faceless, identical, homogeneous group, it's easier to hurt them. It's easier to kill them. Displaced aggression. This is a biggie. Your boss pisses you off. Are you going to take it out on your boss? No. You're going to take it off on somebody else, right? But you're not going to take it out on us. We don't deserve that, so what are you going to do? Just like the sadists, you're going to take it out on them. Someone who isn't one of us, however that might be. Conflict. Whenever there is any sort of conflict going on, where people are trying to get their share, or people are against one another for whatever reason, you're definitely going to see prejudice. As an example, I give you the American political system, which at the moment is two parties, Republicans and Democrats, where members of each party tends to demonize the other. In this in-group versus out-group, they're all alike. They aren't really Americans. They aren't working for the U.S. They're against us. They want to destroy America as we know it, and so forth. And you hear it from both parties, aimed at the other party. They're all like this. They all do that. They all feel that. Boy. Now, scapegoating is something relatively different. And that what you're doing here is you are indeed blaming, in some ways anyway. After all, when you're looking for someone to blame because things have gone wrong, you're not going to blame us. It's not our fault that the economy is in the toilet, right? It's their fault. It's the bank's fault. It's all those people that got loans that shouldn't have. It's those illegal immigrants that come here and take our jobs. It's those politicians who are working against us, who are giving all of our money to the poor people who don't deserve it, or the rich people who have too much money to begin with, or whatever else. A scapegoat is somebody that you blame. You blame them for your problems. And because you blame them for your problems, you probably don't like them very much. They caused you these problems. Why would you like them? And again, that's a whole lot easier to do when they're one of them. When they're one of those illegal immigrants, ew. Unless, of course, you know illegal immigrants, or perhaps you are one, in which case you're going to see them, no, they're all like that. They're all doing this. They're all, taking money from welfare and not giving anything back, which, of course, isn't true, but they all do that. Or all those bankers that just wanted money, or all those people got loans that shouldn't have, the 47% and so forth. Yeah, you gotta blame somebody. And it's easier to blame somebody who's one of them. And it's easier to hate somebody when they're one of them. As before, once you get to know people who are them, and they stop being them, makes it a whole lot more difficult to be prejudiced.